Last week I had a dream that I was watching a friend of mine make an important supernatural discovery. We were outside a large, complexly structured building when we were investigating some barrels. And he reached inside this barrel where he found what we quickly deduced was a fairy egg, the egg of one of the Fae, from which that strange folk are born. How do we know it was a fairy egg? Well, it was about this big, about the size and circumference of a beach ball. And it had this very adorable and yet somewhat tricksterish, sinister face etched on it, which was gradually changing and shifting as we interacted with it. And my friend picked up this somewhat invidious-looking fairy egg. And I kind of cautioned him, saying, fairy magic is dangerous. Are you sure you want to get that close to this mysterious object? But as he was holding it in his hands, utterly beguiled by how cute it looked, it gradually transformed and flowered into this rose and was becoming more and more beautiful by the second. And my companion was so engulfed by this beauty that his face got closer and closer to it until it ended up being totally consumed by this fairy egg. So he literally lost his head in the face of this mysterious witchy magic. Why am I using this as a prelude to this video? Well, I'm exploring the energies of Cancer today, and to me, Cancer, where the Sun and Mercury are currently transiting, is one of the most mysterious signs of the Zodiac, and one of the ones that I often feel it hard to do full justice to. There are all the little buzzwords and cliches that we can bring out about the energy of Cancer as we experience it externally, but as to how we actually experience those energies internally when we're going through a transit, or if we have those placements, I feel is a very different matter. And I guess I want to try and find a way of stepping outside of that box and instead perhaps allowing us to be drawn into that fairy egg and see what crazy ideas get hatched out of that invidious yolk. I think one of the difficulties of talking about the Cancerian experience is that it may well be the most subjective of signs. You have to remember, I am a Virgo. I am ruled by Mercury, and I am accustomed to my powers of ratiocination and analysis being very strong. My mind is usually feverishly busy taking things apart and putting them back together and looking at the various structures and interconnections of things to see how they work. But this is not the way that water functions. That is an airy function. It is not a watery function that is based on more fluid and usually unconscious perceptions. Cancer is ruled by the moon, and whereas the sun governs the daylight realm where everything is clear, everything is out in the open, everything is rational, light, bright, visionary, and apparent, the moon, even though it can arise during the day, is a goddess of the night, of sleep, of dreams, of imaginations, of the vague whisperings and susurrations and peripheral thoughts and feelings that are ever dancing around us, like the mysterious fairies we talked about at the beginning of this video. They are things that are by their nature not clearly defined, which have a tendency to disappear completely when the light of consciousness is shined on them. So how do you begin to talk about something which by its very nature is so tricksterish and elusive, which doesn't want to be seen? And this quality of being shy and introverted and withdrawn, of putting outside many different visages and facades and images that are constantly changing, like the waxing and waning of the moon, is also defined in how the constellation of Cancer presents itself. If you look at the actual astronomical zodiac out there, you see Gemini, very bright, very clear. You see Leo on the other side, bombastically bright and clear, with Regulus shining right there in the chest of the lion. And yet, between them is the sign of Cancer, which is so vague, so faint, so ephemeral and ethereal that at times, unless you are blessed with almost complete darkness and perfect skies, it is almost impossible to see. It's a constellation you often feel and get a fuzzy awareness of rather than being able to see it clearly with your own eyes. And if you have a pair of binoculars handy, you can see the Beehive Nebula, which also again is this fuzzy kind of mysterious heart at the core of this constellation. And so this sign, this experience that is felt and sensed rather than clearly seen, I think can tell us something significant about the Cancerian nature. And I'm loath to say anything too definite, because I'm afraid that being too definite will make this most sensitive of crustaceans scuttle away. But I wonder if there is a degree to which the Cancerian experience is one of existing in a never-ending state of dreaminess. And this is what I mean about them being the most subjective of the signs. Because when we are living in the waking world, where we're all out there on the street and the sun is shining and we're using our senses to comprehend the world around us, we can have some kind of vague certainty that we are looking at the same world, that we can look at the same thing and we can say, what are we all looking at over there? And while we might pick up on different details and different colorations due to our own personal perceptual biases, we will all say, yes, we see a building over there, we see a cat over there, and we're standing on a road. But a dream is something completely private and internal. When you go to sleep at night, you are the only one seeing your dream. You are the only one perceiving your dream. And while cases of shared dreams are not unknown, especially if we bring phenomena like lucid dreaming and astral travel into the equation, there is still an extent to which a dream is your own private piece of cinema that has been constructed from a distinctive cocktail of your consciousness mixing with the huge, confusing, bewildering depths of the collective unconscious at the same time to create something that only you could experience and potentially feel and understand. But when you are bringing that dreamy approach to perception to your waking life, then you are always experiencing everything in your own unique way. You are not just experiencing the sensual world out there, but also the different ways in which your emotions and your imagination responds to the feeling tone of those outer events, which can give them whole levels of overtone and personal meaning that they may not possess to anyone else. At the same time as seeing a thing, you are also seeing all of the potential hopes and fears that that outer experience creates in your inner world. And as I've said before when talking about Cancer, that sensitivity, that imaginal sensitivity, is the same sensitivity that we see in a still body of water. If you're looking at a lake, it can be so serene and clear and picturesque, and yet all it takes is a tiny little pebble to be dropped into it, and suddenly all of these outpourings of ripples are sent scurrying across the surface. Throw a bigger one on and you get waves and pure chaos. So from the tiniest stimuli, huge internal emotional responses can be born, which have a drama and a narrative and a meaning all of their own that is inspired and governed more by dream logic than the logic that more intellectual people are comfortable with. So I think there is this almost innate, mystical, archetypal response to everyone and everything that has a very vivid and lucid coloration to it. And indeed, some of the people I know who have the most visionary and colourful and often cartoonish imaginations around are cancers, because in some way they are permanently connected to that childish imagination, that raw, unself-conscious playfulness with experience and possibility that so many of us lose. They understand how vital our inner child is to making life meaningful and an exciting place to be. And most of us smother, kill, starve and imprison our inner children, but to a Cancerian person, I feel that inner child is in some way always in the control room of their consciousness, whether they like it or not. I think many of them can end up being made to feel ashamed of it, whilst others accept it gleefully. So I think when a Cancerian person is interacting with you, they are not just experiencing you as an individual perception, they are also experiencing you as something that they in some way are dreaming into being. They're experiencing a hypnotic, oniric version to you that has all kinds of mythological overtones that you might not be aware of. And I think that can be part of why Cancerians often need more time to withdraw or hide away or introvert or to be shy and unresponsive than other signs, because the interactions they have with other people and the outer world at large are so intense and overwhelming that more time is needed to digest those experiences, because none of their experiences are ever just mundane. They're never purely earthly. I feel they are always in some way existing in that realm of fey magic that so many of us are unaware of. And that is requiring double the levels of energetic processing than an earthy type might require. But the fact that they live in this curious, dreamy, magical realm, I think is connected to why they feel such a strong drive to have a place that is safe and secure, to have a place that is home, to have a place that has roots and origins and history and a depth that cannot be easily taken away. Because dreams are fucking fragile. They are fragile, they are weird, they are scary, they have their own endless mutability, they are ever fluxing. You know, they're always waxing and waning, like the moon that generates that feverish sea of hypnotic images. And if that is your basic response to life, then life can feel like a river, or like the waves in a lake that are always ebbing and flowing. And that can be a little uneasy, because while there is a cyclical pattern to these things, every moment you are always changing, and you are never quite the same as the person that you were just a moment ago, even if you might be that same person again in a month's time when you're at the same point in the lunar cycle. And so if the world isn't quite real, if it is always changing from one thing to another like it does in Ovidian poetry, you know, we've all had those experiences of dreams where we are talking to one person, and then by the end of the sequence they've turned into someone else, and the whole scenario and environment around us has changed completely. And if your real world experience of life is like that as well, I think it's natural that whilst you might love that and respect that as being a vital part of you and your own personal weird and magic, you still want to have a container for it. Water without a container lacks shape, lacks definition, lacks direction, and can just easily turn into a puddle that could just sprawl out everywhere, be vague and ambiguous and have no purpose, or just end up being burnt up by the sun. It derives its power from being able to pool or flow in a specific location that has the right grooves or depth and circumference to hold it, to be a womb space for its dreaming potentiality. And so the Cancerian urge is to find that place in which it can fit, in which its waters can flow or be sedentary and stagnant. And this is why we have the image of the crab and the idea of that Cancerian quest for home. Because if we think about a crab just as being this delicate structure of soft, fragile meat, but surrounded by this hard, keratinous carapace of a shell that makes it tougher and something that people won't mess with. Unless you're a hermit crab, your shell is an exoskeleton that you have grown around you to fit you specifically. That shell has been formed to perfectly interact with your own private morphology. Your shell won't fit another crab. That shell has been grown by you and for you. And once it has used up its purpose, you shed it, and then you find another that now fits the person you are. And I feel when we are talking about home and the drive to find a place we belong is like finding a shell or a womb or an enclosure that just slots into place around our experience of reality in such a way that there is no longer a feeling of dissonance. For instance, if you are in a place where you feel you don't belong, where you are out of your element, then you have that constant sense of stress and unease and dis-ease that you are struggling and having to make conscious effort to know how to interact with the people around you, to know how to interact with your environment, and to know how to make sense of or respond correctly to everything that's going on. And that creates a level of stress because it means that nothing is happening on autopilot. Nothing is happening unconsciously. We can't just switch off and melt and merge and pool into everything around us. Instead, there's that battle as our own inherent energies struggle insecurely to make sense of what is going on around us. And I think that can be part of some of the insecurity and sensitivity that we associate with the Cancerian, in that if they are in those spaces where they do not feel at home, they have such an eagerness to try and turn that experience into some kind of home where they can feel that unconscious level of comfort, that they might try very hard to make themselves liked and agreeable to try and compensate for how uncomfortable they actually feel on the inside. Or sometimes it might just be expressed in that withdrawn moodiness because the experience is so intense that it overwhelms them and they can't interact with things correctly. But when we are in our home, when we have found the place that we belong, we don't have to do that. We can switch off, we can fall asleep, we can rest, we can just be our total authentic selves without worrying about how we're going to respond or how we're going to translate that. We can just be natural. And the desire to stay in that place where we are most natural, where we are most organic, where we are just like a tree that has arisen in and of itself beyond from the earth without anyone artificially having to plant it there, is the experience that the Cancerian soul is looking for above all others. But a home itself is an ambiguous phenomenon, as it is not necessarily a place so much as a particular experience that a place, a person, a feeling, a time of day, or an area of life is capable of making us respond to. We can all feel at home in different areas. For some people, our home is literally our childhood home, where we had those experiences of being perhaps a happy, playful and imaginal child, where we felt we could just be our most raw, natural selves without having to worry about the terror of becoming some kind of self-sufficient adult. For other people, they might never have felt at home in those situations. Home is something that they have to carve out and seek for themselves. They might find home in the arms of a lover who they do feel safe with, who they do switch off with. They might feel home with a particular community if we're talking about an 11th house home. Home might be an experience they have when they are subjected to a certain type of art or poetry or music that in some way speaks to something ineffable within their own being. And that is why it's hard to talk about the Cancerian experience, because it is by its nature ineffable. It's not rational, it is a feeling and dreaming organizational unit. And whilst air will make deductions about things and then try and communicate them, water feels things, and yet feels things that are impossible to express. Sometimes we can hint at them in art and music and the touch that we offer to other people, but to communicate it directly is often so futile a task that it almost seems worthwhile trying to express it. How do you give someone a lake in a single word? For other people, home is not of this earth. Many people don't feel at home in their bodies, in this reality, in this physical incarnation. They feel that their home must have been somewhere else, must have been in another in another universe, in another dimension, and therefore they always feel like a foreigner or an alien in some way in this one. So the quest for home is not an easy one, and yet there is still the desire to in some way understand one's roots, one's history and one's origins, because knowing those things can in some way give you the roots of your being that can be so mysterious. And again, to trace this back to the wheel of the Zodiac and the constellations as well, in terms of identifying the wheel of the Zodiac with the wheel of the houses as well. You know, we have Aries there as the rising sign, we have Libra as the descendant, we have Capricorn as that point of aspiration at the top of the wheel of the Zodiac, and at the bottom of the sky we have Cancer. So if we almost imagined the solar system as one enormous cosmic tree, this glorious arboreal axis mundi that had its roots in the sky, with all of the leaves being different trees and stellar clusters and nebulae and scattered disk objects, then Cancer would be the mysterious deep pool into which the roots of that tree are seeking. Because to know our origins ultimately is to trace everything back to the womb. And then to want to go further than that, to ask, well, who was I before I was born? Who was I before I came into the womb? But even just tracing things as far back as that and thinking that I am in some way a synthesis not just of the alchemical combination of my two parents, but also the patriarchal and matriarchal narratives and collective unconsciousness that resides in the morphic resonance of the long lineages of those two people. I am a continuum in this point of history. So by knowing your roots and origins, by knowing where you belong, or having a place where you feel you can belong and be unconscious and dream safely, as though you were returning back to your own personal Orphic egg, helps to give shape and definition to what otherwise could be endlessly vague and infinite. Instead of just having that water stretching out madly, you have a condensed solid pond that is in some way navigable and manageable. You have given boundaries to the boundless, and home, in that perspective, is a place where infinity can go to rest. Anyway, I just wanted to kind of share those thoughts and ideas in a very loose and exploratory manner. None of this is meant to be definitive, mostly because I am not in an analytical frame of mind right now with Mercury being in Cancer. So I have to go with the flow and try and approach these things a little more differently. I have been going through many hormonal changes and am having some curious outer planetary experiences all of my own right now. So I'm finding it hard to stick to my usual routine of how I approach astrology. So yeah, making a looser video is the only way I'm going to be able to make videos at the moment, so I hope you enjoy this one as much as the others. Please share your own personal Cancerian insights and perspectives on this. I would love to hear about you from you and your different lunar frequencies. Perhaps I will make more videos on this subject once I've had time to digest more ideas. If you would like to get in contact with me to explore your own lunar depths, then you can message me at thestarsunraveled@outlook.com. You can follow me on Instagram at astrologyandunderwear, and you can support me on Patreon at www.patreon.com/thestarsunraveled. And again, I am apologizing that I have not been as prolific as usual, but I have needed time to rest and reflect and to figure out a new way of approaching this. Anyway, there is a fairy egg over there that I need to get my head back into.